All
Okay,
right.
we're ready.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. There was no action taken in closed session on pending litigation, so we are now in open session. Our next item is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the county of Winnebago entitled Roxanne, I can't pronounce her last name, Calderin versus the Winnebago County in the amount of $38,000. Can I get a motion and a second, please? Motion by Mr. Butita, seconded by Ms. Crosby. Thank you very much. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I will take roll call on this. And Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Our next item is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the county of Winnebago entitled Edward Zendler versus Winnebago County in the amount of $14,200 and change. Can I get a motion and a second, please? Motion by Mr. Butita, second by Mr. Hoffman. Discussion. Seeing none, I will take roll call. Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Unanimous consent. Motion carries. All right, we will move on to our item H, which is our CFO report on River Bluff Nursing Home, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Ritter. To speak on that. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chairman and the Finance Committee. First, I've got several quick announcements. I know a number of you will be very happy to hear that the first round of checks for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program will be hitting the mailbox. We have 7 checks going out tomorrow for a total of $31,000. I know that's a trickle, but that's going to really pick up starting next week. Second, I want to give an update. I know Mr. Schultz has been very patient in waiting for the news concerning discussions with the Winnebago landfill. I had an opportunity to have a meeting with the representative of that organization, Mr. Lacey, who came out, met with me, the administrator, Pat, and Chairman Chiarelli, and we had a nice discussion on the landfill and some of the issues that they're facing. Of primary concern for the Finance Committee, I got a projected timeline of between 13 and 16 years based on current activity as far as usefulness of the landfill and funds drawing from the landfill as far as tipping fees for the county, or host fees. And to be corrected, would be host fees. But one of the other things that they're going to supply me to assist with planning for future endeavors related to host fees is going to be a remaining capacity report, which they've promised to give me on an annual basis in order to assist with calculating useful life of the landfill. So thank you, Mr. Schultz, for being patient on that. If there are no questions, I could proceed on to the presentation on the River Bluff Nursing Home, or if you have questions concerning those 2 items, I'd be happy to answer those questions at this time.
All right, does anybody have any questions regarding the
Yeah,
landfill?
just
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you very much for that report, Mr. Rickard. Just wanted to clarify that in the projections that you had been doing to this point, the 2034 to 2036 end date, that's within the range of the expectations that you've been using?
Correct. We've been conservative in our estimates. I think the most we were going out is looking out 12 years with the landfill, and their range is between 13 and 16 years.
Thank you very much.
All right. Are there any other questions before we proceed? All right. Seeing none or hearing none, please, Mr. Rickert, please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to attempt to share my screen here. And hopefully you can see my screen. You should see a memo directed to the Finance Committee.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. As you know, we've been had a lot of issues with COVID, particularly with the nursing home has been hit rather hard with issues related to COVID-19. I was asked by Administrator Pat Thompson to do a review of the accounting operations at the River Nursing Home facility. And this report that I'm going to give consists of two parts. First, I'm going to give you some key financial information to give you some backdrop of what we looked at. And second, and most importantly, some specific recommendations and things we're doing to help improve operations while maintaining a high level of resident care at the facility. Okay, first and foremost, I want to give you a purview of the historical figures with the nursing home. As you can see, if you can follow my mouse, that even before COVID-19 hit, we were somewhat struggling we were losing between $1 million to $1.5 million a year in loss operating the nursing home. When COVID hit, that ballooned up to about $3.5 to $3 million a year. So, which significantly depleted our reserves and drew into a negative picture. So that's the bad news and something I want you to be aware of from a historical perspective. The problems didn't start with COVID-19, but they certainly exacerbated the problem. Going on, one of the things we noticed that stands out glaringly as a problem with the nursing home is our ability to collect accounts receivable. This has been a continuing and ongoing problem for the nursing home. Mr. Lofgren, the account manager out at the nursing home, has done a great job of working on these numbers, but this is something we've focused on and something we want to really pay attention to. As you can see, our aging of receivables, there's a fairly nice level spread of aging going forward. When we look at what's older than 210 days plus, we have over $6.5 million that's due us. That's something that's a real concern. There are a number of problems with that. It doesn't matter how things look on the income statement. If you're not collecting revenues, that's a huge problem. It creates a real drain on cash reserves for the county. So that's really a particular area of our focus that we wanted to look at.
Quick question for you, Mr.
Sure.
Along the aging, I know there was talks about essentially looking at writing some of these off. Have we taken into consideration what the recommendation would be that and the impact to the financials?
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at, we developed, mainly Mark Lofgren did a great job developing a write-off policy. And that's a twofold thing. One, we want to identify accounts receivable that are in jeopardy of being lost. Two, we want to come up with a proactive measure in order to deal with those accounts receivable before they become worthless. And that's part of the recommendations going forward, is that we work with our current collection agency to collect those funds, and or look at another provider that does service currently with the circuit clerk. So those are two of our options we're looking at. Part of the problem going forward is up until last month, we didn't have a accounts receivable write-off policy. And that's something we spent a lot of diligent time working with the finance department, our external auditors, and I give a lot of credit to Mark Lofgren for creating a lot of the meat that made that document possible. And that's also provided in the packet I sent out to the finance committee. But that is one of the solutions, is first and foremost, before you can deal with your accounts receivable, you have to have a policy with which to do so. So that's further on in the presentation.
All right.
Okay. So one of the things we need to focus on in order to make it very simple and just kind of set all the figures aside, we have to have a basic understanding of what it takes to make a profit, or not even a profit, but just to keep our head above water with the nursing home. What's our break-even point? It's a very important number to hit because it's easy to get lost in the details of the numbers. And what we've determined is examining the fixed costs for the nursing home and our total variable costs. The break-even is probably about 175 patients. Right now, the last time I checked, we're probably at 140, which means we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of making up to do. But with some of the recommendations we have going forward, I think we have some great ideas with how to address some of those concerns. And to get us up over where we would like to be is probably up around 190, 200 would be a real ideal number for us to hit. So we have a lot of work to do. This is something that the nursing home's been able to do in the past, and that's the goal we want to have. Is we'd like to get at or near 200 if we can. And we got pro forma financials to show you what that could mean for the nursing home going forward. So these are the numbers we ran going forward of what could happen. As you can see, we're still projecting for 2021, we'll probably still be in the hole, approximately 900,000, almost all due to COVID. There are a lot of issues related with COVID we're dealing with. Here's the good news with that. The revenue offset that we lost in 21 and in 22, a lot of that can be paid for with our American Rescue Plan funds. So we can offset those revenue losses with our funds. And that's something we're going to budget so we can recoup those losses, put that back in the budget and get some payback from the nursing home for the revenues that have been fronted to them in order to meet their shortfall. So that's not all bad news. We have a funding source through IRB to deal with some of that. Our goal is to push these numbers forward. We're looking at modestly trying to grow 2 residents a month until we can get at or near our numbers. And this is a demonstration of what those cash flows could like if we're successful with being able to hit those goals. So we can not only turn this around, hopefully by late next year, but we can also slowly start building those fund reserve balances up if all goes well. And there are a lot of caveats with that. Whenever you run a nursing home, it's not a for-profit operation, obviously. Some of the key concerns we have, and we heard some of them tonight, is liability mitigation is a real big factor with the nursing home. We need to do everything we can to make sure we're taking precautions in order to limit our exposure to risk, which is expense, not only for the nursing home, but ultimately for the county. And that's another thing we're going to address in some of these recommendations. So here's, I'm sorry, please go.
Yes, there was a question from Mr. Kelly. And maybe you'll address this on your recommendations, but Mr. Kelly asked, how about renting the operation? Is that an option that you guys have been looking at? I know you can talk about that in the recommendations piece, but I just wanted to throw it out there before we proceed. A question just came up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, can you repeat that? I lost you in my audio.
So there's a question out there from Mr. Kelly. It states, how about renting out the operations, of the facility? Like,
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. One more time, please.
yes, I don't know if you can see the comment, the chat. There's a question on there. And it just says about renting the operation out. Is that an option you guys have looked at?
Okay, that is not something we've looked at. That is probably a focus a little bit beyond the scope of what we were doing with this financial review of operations. There are a number of things the board could consider as far as outsourcing or divesting from the nursing home in various capacities and how they wanted to do that, whether that means bringing a private firm and or spin off, so to speak, the nursing home. But that's well beyond the scope of what we were looking at tonight. And I would be very cautious with that. I would be very slow and cautious. Look at all the different angles of that, but that's definitely something the board can consider if they wanted to consider that. But there are all kinds of moving pieces beyond financial with that decision as far as public opinion and the role of the board in that consideration also.
Before you move off this slide, I'm just wondering, would those federal funds not only be able to be applied to the losses that you showed us on the fund balance, the previous fund balance report, but would those federal funds also be available for the amount of the $9 million, I think it was, in receivables that we're going to end up writing off?
Very good question, Mr. Schultz. If they came during the period that was affected by COVID-19, and we can show a relationship between those. But remember, those write-offs would be 3 years old plus. So there may be some of those receivables we could look at and potentially declare them as something. It's definitely something worth looking at as far as ARP funds. It's very clear on the revenue side. I would have to get more detail as far as what they consider revenue loss. If accounts receivable qualify that people are not paying, and we can show that the reason they're not paying is it's COVID-19 related, I think we've got a very strong case. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Schultz. I'm going to make a note of that because I think there's another opportunity there in a different way of looking at this than I didn't consider, but that's definitely something worth looking at is if we can look at our accounts receivable and see if there's some ARP money available for the losses we're going to share on that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on this document here? Okay, I'll continue. So we have, and this is for your reading pleasure, the collection of past due accounts policy. Like I said, a lot of time and effort went into this. I want to thank Mr. Lofgren and Pat McDermott for their efforts with this document. Molly Terrini, our finance director, also had a significant contribution, and also our external auditors provide a lot of feedback on this document. It's a pretty solid document that talks through the accounts receivable process, identifies what would be an item we would want to turn over to a collection agency, and then from this policy, we can then determine what we're going to turn over and hopefully get collections on those issues. So it talks about past due accounts and procedures. I won't read through this document. I'll let you preview it. If you have questions, you can contact me at a later time and we can discuss the policy. I'm going to get to some of the recommendations now. And I'm going to jump over and get to my notes here. So first and foremost, with this review, we wanted to develop a collection policy that's already been done. The document's right here for your review. The other thing we wanted to do, we have an accounts receivable specialist specifically already under contract with a nursing home called Markoff Law LLC that specializes in nursing home collections. We can consider using our collection policy to contact them and say, hey, we're ready to sit down, look at our accounts receivable and determine which ones we want to turn over for collections. We've also had significant discussions with a firm called Harrison Harris that does collections for the circuit court clerk. It also came very highly recommended. So we are going to sit down, evaluate that, and determine what would be the best course of action for the nursing home. They both have significant positive factors in their favor. But if that's a recommendation I would make to the finance committee, is that once receivables hit a certain age mark, that we engage the services of a professional firm to do those collections, and that can only improve our bottom line by doing so. And that's recommendation B under recommendations. Number C, and it's something that we're going to work on, and it seems like a no-brainer, but if we're reviewing the documentation, there's nothing in there that requires people being admitted to the nursing home to have all their financial information in order before admittance. I want to make that part of the procedure that if you're going to be admitted to our nursing home, you at least comply with all our requirements for providing financial information. So when and if the time comes for us to proceed with collection, either against the state or the federal government or the estate, that we have a mechanism to do so. So that's something that we're working on, is simply amending the admittance policy at the pleasure of the finance committee to specifically state that if you're going to be admitted to our nursing home, you're going to provide us with all the financial information we need in order to provide the services that we have to pay for. Another recommendation D, and this is really a no-brainer. Even if we weren't going to upgrade our collection of accounts receivable, for a number of reasons, we're going to want to engage the services of a company called PointClick Care. A lot of what we do as far as reporting purposes requires the reporting mechanisms in this type of software. It makes categorizing, collection, organizing, all the things we need to do to report to the state and federal government much easier for staff in order to provide the information we need not only for financial purposes to the county, but for the state and federal government for compliance to get that information in the format they need, and this company can do it. It's not an insignificant purchase. This would cost the county approximately, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we have Gus Gutner on the line if he's still there. Gus, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Dave.
Gus, you want to take over, talk a little bit more about PointClick Care. You know significantly more about that software system than I do, so if you can fill the committee in.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Chairman. Currently, we use a portion of PointClick Care for the last 6 to 8 years, and we do things like nurse charting, CNA charting, and MDS reporting. MDS means minimum data set that is required by Medicare and Medicaid that shares with those two paying services services we provided a resident. What we've and PointClick Care once again is only partially used for those things. PointClick Care offers an admission to disposition. That's how I phrase it. Whatever happens to the resident at the end, whatever that disposition is, and we have requirements for electronic medical records from the state of Illinois. We have looked at a return on investment, whereas we have seen where PointClick Care, when implemented properly, from admission to disposition, there's an opportunity within 12 months to increase the resident per day revenues in Medicare and Medicaid, potentially up to over 200%. More than what it is now. And so we definitely encourage using this software from admission through disposition. It helps us enhance revenue. It helps us become in compliance with the state of Illinois, and would also help minimize exposure to liability, meaning if a care plan isn't documented correctly at the current moment, because we do a lot of paper at River Bluff. Things become electronic, things are done with tablets, things are done with notebooks. It improves care, it improves accuracy. So we're encouraging the adoption of that. And how's that for a summary, Dave?
Great job there, Gus. That's the reason we brought you in here. And you also do a great job in the IT department. I'm going to continue on.
How much is it?
Yeah. Cost?
The cost factor, Gus?
The estimate at the moment is it's a cloud-based solution. The rental on that is about $10,000, $11,000 a month. That's what we're looking at right now, Mr. Salgado. We're still working with the vendor and fine-tuning that cost.
All right.
The software rental alone.
All right. So the question that I have then along the same lines is this something that we could recover from the rescue plan money that we currently are getting?
And that's a good question. And I've got about less than 5 minutes left of my presentation, and I can address that question specifically. So I'll continue on, and then we'll wrap up the presentation, and then be more than happy additional questions. And that's something that we looked at. As you recall, we have in the hopper right now for board consideration our capital plan. All the items in this sheet right here in blue are part of that capital plan. And here's the focus. What we're trying to do at River Bluff are a couple of things. One, we want to reduce our liability. We don't want patients tripping on uneven sidewalks and patios or staff. There's already currently a request, part of our capital plan, to invest $300,000 in repairing these items at the nursing home. It's a critical function. One bad lawsuit could more than be offset by the repair that we're talking about here. So that's currently part of your capital plan. The items in orange are part of our ARP plan. That's the plan that's going to come later this summer. It's a much bigger, ambitious plan, but where I could, the goal was to try to shift capital plans that meet ARP requirements and pay for those through ARP. One of those items is going to be a nurse call. Essentially, forgive me if I'm not very clear on some of these items and what they do, but my understanding is this is the ability to allow patients to contact nurses when something's going on. The current nurse call is not very good. This is a new system that will be replacing that with ARP funds. Gas-fired steamer for $90,000. Apparently, that's a cost-saving initiative. When the laundry system was removed from the nursing home, the need for the boiler system we currently have was unnecessary, and this is a much more efficient model that will reduce operating costs at the nursing home. A Wander Guard, this is kind of a tracking system for patients, so we know where they are and can kind of keep an eye on them, and so they don't literally wander off the facility site. I think the benefit of that is fairly obvious from a liability standpoint, why we would want to do that. Again, that would be through ARP. There are many other components here, and the one specifically I will address for at least while we're getting ARP funds, I believe the PointClick Care should be able to be paid for. We can easily justify why we're using ARP funds to pay for care at the nursing home, especially with the issues they're having with COVID. So at least for the first through 2024, we can use ARP funds for our PointClick Care and pay for that cost. So it gives us an opportunity to evaluate the system, pay for it with federal dollars, and see what kind of efficiency that it provides. And then in 2025, we make a decision on whether we want to continue this with a different model or consider what we want to do at that time. But at least until then, we've got a little bit of breathing room to determine whether or not this is a good fit for the county and get the system paid for by ARP funds. And a lot of these other components are related as far as providing the electronic equipment we need to make PointClick Care operate most efficiently, as far as computers for med cards, network components, healthcare information technology administered to train staff on PointClick Care, provide advice and guidance on general medical care too, and once again, try to help reduce reliability with the nursing home. And then finally, there are some communication issues and stuff we need for staff with PCs, wireless My Telephones, and desktop My Telephones for another $30,000. So we're trying to find ways to meet the needs of a nursing home, to address those in ways that aren't going to impact our bottom line anymore, and hopefully provide the resources. But because by implementing a lot of these functions and resources, I believe it will significantly enable us to boost our star rating. And a lot of people use the star rating to evaluate which nursing home to use. And that goes back to our break-even analysis. If we can push up over or to 190 to 200, we think that's the sweet spot for being able to manage our costs efficiently and not make the nursing home a difficulty for the county board and the general fund. So adopting these recommendations will significantly improve the financial position of River Bluff Nursing Home by reducing accounts receivable balances and improve the collection rate. In addition, making necessary repairs will improve resident safety while reducing liability concerns. In my effort to prepare this report, I'd also like to thank the following people. Mark Lofgren, first and foremost, he contributed significantly to all the information we have here. I'd also like to thank Pat McDermott for her information and advice and input into this process. Russ Gettner and Ann Johns also contributed significantly. So that concludes my report. If you have questions, I'm more than ready, willing, and able to answer those questions at this point in time.
Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Rickert, for this information. It's good to see that we're staying on top of, or at least realizing that what the data is. It'll hopefully improve our situation out there. Specifically, I don't want to micromanage the accounts receivable, but as I look at the list of payers, there's obviously some entities that are government. Some are probably private insurance companies. Some are individuals. But just looking at two of these things, the Medicaid electronic for 1.5 and the Illini Care for 1.2. It's almost 30% of that 6 million that is long-term over that. You know, one of the tools to manage account receivables is to deny credit to those that don't pay their bills. And it appears, you know, looking at this line I care, I'm not sure what that is. That's an insurance company, but it doesn't look like we're currently doing business with them anymore. So that would probably be a good thing, that we don't incur more expense with them. But going down to Medicaid electronic, they owe us 1.5 over 90 or over 210 days, but we are still doing business with them. I suspect that's a government entity and that's something we can't get away with. But I would urge that where possible, that if we can deny credit to those that aren't paying on a timely basis, that's another tool that we can use to manage our receivables. So just real quick, that if you know off the top of your head what the reason for those two large numbers are for those two entities, Illini Care and Medicaid electronic.
At that level, I think I'm going to turn the discussion over to Mr. Lofgren. He's in a much better position to answer specific detailed questions on the receivables than I am. So, Mark, if you're able, if you can answer the question, please.
Absolutely. The Medicaid electronic is just straight public aid people, and they used to have an office here in Rockford. They've centralized it to Chicago, and we kind of got put on the back burner. We work with them all the time, but they're just not very good at turning things around. And we are looking right now at these. If you see a place on there where it says Medicaid pending, that's where we're trying to clean up everything and get Medicaid to catch up with the payments that they owe us. And you said that it looked like we stopped doing business with Illini Care. Illini Care is a Medicaid managed care company, and so it's also a public aid. But we didn't stop doing business with them. They started doing business as Aetna Better Health. And that's the same thing. During COVID, they've had people working from home most of the time, and it's almost impossible to get a hold of them and everything. But like I said, we keep on it, and we'll keep working. And now that we have a collections policy and some things in order, I think we can make a big difference.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Are there?
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Schultz.
Yeah, as soon as possible, I'm sure you've worked on this already, but as soon as possible, it would be really very helpful to this committee to know how much of the 9 million you believe is collectible. I think that's a critical issue because you have in your revenue projections, you have an anticipated amount of revenue based on how much revenue we've been booking to this point. But a certain portion of the amount that we've been recording as revenue is uncollectible. So that means that we've overstated our revenue in the reporting to this point. And if I'm wrong about that, and it's just a timing issue, and we're gonna catch up, then I love that. But I'm concerned that net we're gonna have to write off some of this $9 million. So that's just an empowering piece of information. The next thing I want to say is thank you very much. I asked you to do a projection. You did that. I think it's exceptionally helpful. I just want to say, though, that if in those revenue projections, Mr. Rickert, where you're showing the fund balance go up to, I think it was $7 million in the projections, if $7 million of the revenue over that 5-year period of time is uncollectible, based on the credibility and just based on how the system works, then your projections need to take that into account. So whatever we're learning about the collectability of our current $9 million accounts receivable balance, we've got to apply that then to the pro forma, to the projection going forward. I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, exactly. I'm just agreeing with you.
I'm also concerned about how much we pay to a Harris & Harris or how much we pay to another collection agency once it goes to that point. Again, this goes to the issue of what's the actual revenue. Because if we're paying a substantial percentage of the receivable to that collection agency, but we've recorded that as 100% revenue, then, that's an inaccurate representation. I know we'll show that as legal expense, but we have to, again, in our projections, we have to be smart about how much we then show as the collection fee or the expense side. And then the other thing that I'm concerned about going forward is nothing in the fund balance projection takes into account the tort liability. And I think it's critical that if you haven't already gotten the data on how much we have paid out of pocket for the River Bluff Nursing Home for tort liability claims payments. I understand that the systems that you're talking about putting in place are going to improve that. The idea is that we'll have less of that. I love that. But I also think we need to be realistic about this is a high risk endeavor that we're involved in. And so I would start with the pro forma that you did, and then I would subtract from that pro forma the collection costs and or the uncollectability on the revenues that just based on how the system works, we don't actually collect the revenue. We can't. They end up being written off. And then also take into account anticipated tort liability expenses. And I don't know, and this is my final comment, I don't know if there's any legal way for us to have a payment from the River Bluff Nursing Home account over to the tort liability fund to help the tort liability fund to handle the claims specifically related to the River Bluff Nursing Home. But if that's legally possible, I think that's an avenue that we really need to pursue because we have too many things that are off the books. And the largest item related to this process, this nursing home that's off the books, is the tort liability expenditures that we make. That's all I had. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. You took the winds out of my sails with your comments there because I was getting to Mr. Rickert on the 5-year projection. I think it's a good attempt to kind of get us an idea where we're headed. But there are some concerns about the infrastructure cost out there as well as part of it. How do we incorporate that, the receivable piece of it, and obviously your revenue projections. And I understand completely. Hopefully those recommendations like you've made, work out and are that. But those are good questions that Mr. Schultz brought up, and that's where I think we need to take another dive at it, and kind of realistically kind of try to piece, projections that look into those accounts. So, especially, and I think about the liability, the tort piece of it. That's something maybe internally you guys can discuss about that, and incorporate that. From my standpoint, I think it's great. Haven't done this, and I think that definitely we need that 5-year projection to kind of assess, because you'll have questions like Mr. Kelly asked. All right, based on that 5-year projection, does it make sense for us to 1, rent it out, outsource it, 2, sell it, whatever it may be, right? So those are the scenarios that we want to set up. So us as a county board can make that decision, whether we proceed or not proceed, and make a business decision, in the interest of the county as a whole. Not only that, but the citizens as well, because we understand River Bluff is, I've heard from people say it's a great thing. It's an asset for individuals that can't afford to go to other nursing. So I think that we need to continue to look at the 5-year projection, look at our break-even analysis that we kind of did. I appreciate that, but kind of make a determination on where, is our next direction that we should be getting towards, whether it sense from a business standpoint to, continue on because of the liability versus receivables, et cetera, versus outsourcing or looking at, selling the place, whatever the case may be. So just keep in mind those things, and if you can refine some of those things, or I think it's a great exercise, and I appreciate that, because I don't think we've done that in the past. So I do appreciate that. Are there any other questions or comments for Mr. Rickard? All right, seeing none or hearing none, we'll move. Thank you, Mr. Richter, once again for the information, very valuable information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other matters to come before this committee? All right, seeing none or hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Schultz, second by Mr. Hoffman. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, and no? All right, the ayes have it. Thank you very much for being patient, and I appreciate all the information on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night, everyone.